Okay, good morning, Bore da pawb, and welcome to the launch of the report Beyond Essentials, looking at the impact of the cost of living crisis on community organisations and the people they work with. My name is Chris Johns. I'm the Chief Exec of Building Communities Trust, and I'll be chairing today's event. Before I pass over to our main researchers for a presentation on the report, just a couple of bits of housekeeping. As you've probably noticed, the event is being recorded, so this is to allow us to show it on our website later. The nature of the discussion should mean that people's identities won't be known anyway. If this is an issue for you in any way, please let us know. As we're running this as a webinar, the chat function is disabled for general conversation, but you can use the Q&A to ask questions at any time. The event is being run in English only today because all the presentation is in English. Ond os chi eisiau gofyn cwestiwn yn Gymraeg, teimlo'n rhydd i roi fo mewn a ni'n gallu cyfieithu ar y pryd yn syth. There'll be two presentations during the event, and the slides will come out to all participants by the end of the week. And just as a quick overview, what we'll be doing today is going through the report and its findings, led by Rosie and Graham, the researchers from Funding Assist, who've worked with us on this project. Eleri, our BCT's policy officer, will talk about the recommendations from the report. Then there'll be a section where we actually go through the questions that have come up in the Q&A. And then in part two of the report, Matt from Victory Grocery Store in Cwmbran and Heidi Jacobson from the Hope Pantry in Merthyr will talk about their work and the work of their organisations in addressing the crisis locally. And there'll be a chance to ask questions of them before the end as well. Okay, thank you very much. And Rosie and Graham, over to you.
Thanks, Chris. I'll just share my screen and we can get started. Okay, so firstly, I'd just like to say thank you to Building Communities Trust for giving us the opportunity to work with them on this research. The research has taken place at the beginning part of this year. It actually started in December of last year and has concluded in around April. And we've spent that time putting the findings together. So today we're just going to be taking you through some of the key findings of the research. And as I said, as Chris has already said, any questions, please keep them in mind, and there'll be a Q&A session later on. And this presentation is going to be delivered by myself and my colleague Graham. And the division of labour was mainly that I was focused on more of the qualitative research, working with focus groups and interviewing people, and Graham was more focused on the statistical side of things. So we just wanted to say a great big thank you to all the fantastic organisations that gave such brilliant contribution to the research. Their passion, integrity, energy and commitment was just mind-blowing for us as researchers to see. And also to the CBCs and other umbrella organisations and funders that helped contribute to giving us insight into some of the issues. And there's a list there, but actually there's far more in terms of the over 140 organisations that responded by survey, which at a time when we are generally swamped by surveys, I think was quite a good result. And we're really grateful to those who took the time to do so. So I just firstly wanted to talk about how we did the research. And as I mentioned, the main part of the research was a survey which was completed by 144 organisations in total, 134 community groups and 10 umbrella organisations. We also carried out 2 roundtable discussions with 16 stakeholders that included community leaders and other stakeholders such as local CBCs and funders. And we also undertook one-to-one interviews and conducted 10 case studies that involved visiting, in some circumstances, the organisations as well, to get a deeper feel for their work. And in terms of the brief itself, which was set by Building Communities Trust to try and uncover some of these areas that are very important to their policy work. It was to find out what community organisations are doing in response to the to the cost of living crisis, and the impact of the cost of living crisis on people who use those community facilities. And how community organisations, to what degree they are actually replacing public sector organisations and work in some circumstances, and understanding the impact on community organisations' own resources on their staff and volunteers as well. And I trying to identify what community organisations feel might lessen the impact of the cost of living crisis on their communities and on themselves as organisations. So just in terms of setting the context, at the same time as as we were doing our research, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation UK Poverty 2024 report was published and found that very deep poverty has significantly risen in the last 20 years, and with a 148% increase in destitution in the last 5 years. In Wales, children are more likely to be living in poverty than any other group, according to DWP statistics. And Helen Barnard, Director of Policy Research and Impact at the Trussell Trust, at the launch of the report, described how the community sector are applying a sticking plaster on the wound, but the wound is getting bigger. And this statement really chimed with me at the time of us doing this research, because it really echoed what we were hearing in terms of the growing challenge of meeting the needs of people within our communities. In terms of trying to establish when the cost of living crisis began, and particularly for community organisations to be able to distinguish between the challenges that they experienced during and after COVID-19, it was really quite difficult to distinguish that, particularly for community groups who generally have felt that it's just been a continuum of challenge, you know, starting with the pandemic, and which has just continued to evolve into a new crisis. But for the purposes of this research, and it's widely recognised that the cost of living crisis began in September 2021. We couldn't undertake this research without acknowledging the repercussions of COVID-19 that are still resonating in so many different aspects of our communities. The fact that there's been a shrinkage of public services, and the fact that many workers never came back from COVID, from the pandemic, and are less present in communities, was something that we heard a lot from the organisations that we surveyed and spoke to, which has exacerbated the pressures that they have felt within their own organisations. The impact on mental health needs has been, it has continued. Lots of things that became uncovered during COVID-19 or were triggered through COVID-19 that have continued into the new crisis. And some felt that COVID-19 had actually shone a light on things that may have previously been hidden, such as food poverty that was discovered through the course of lockdown, so that many of the food projects that have developed began during the pandemic, and it was only then, in many cases, the extent of food poverty was actually discovered. One of the people we spoke to, a community group in Power, said that the majority of statutory services work from home. They never came back. We have a huge county hall. No one works there. Everyone works from home. All these support agency workers that were out in the field aren't present, and it's contributed to the problem. You know, we have to appreciate that this is one viewpoint. Our sample is very small, and it's about painting a picture of the issues that are being experienced, but it was something that we heard numerous times within the research and the survey. Other contributing factors, the public funding cuts to services and contracts, which has had a knock-on effect on the availability of money for community organisations that may traditionally have been able to apply for smaller pots of money. The closure of shops, banks, pubs and post offices in many of our communities. the transport issues and barriers in rural areas particularly, exacerbated by digital exclusion, particularly for older people and more vulnerable members of the community. And one of our contributors described how, due to the cost of living crisis, so many local businesses have closed. There is nowhere people can buy things like wellies, coats, slippers, trainers for school, as nowhere sells them. If they can't shop online, there's very little public transport and it's expensive. So particularly within rural areas, that aspect has been a major problem for communities who aren't able to access low-cost items for their children. And that was something that we heard, that a lot of clothes recycling and that sort of thing have really exploded in popularity. And it's not just about the cost of living crisis, it's also about lack of availability in some circumstances. The reduction in availability of grant funding and contracts has meant that there's less money in the system generally. We know from speaking to community organisations that grant funding is becoming far more competitive, whereas before success rates might have been a lot higher. Now, even organisations who are good at applying for funding are struggling to obtain grants in the way that they may have done previously. And as Amanda Carr at Swansea Council for Voluntary Services commented, there's no money in the system. And the concern is that the issue is going to get worse, and perhaps the impact hasn't actually been felt fully yet. And then there's an underfunding of the sector in terms of contracts. And the NPC State of the Sector Research Report, which is for the UK, based on UK findings, found that 62% of charities believe they do not receive the full value it costs to deliver a public sector contract. And the report estimates that charities prop up state services by 2.4 billion a year. And this was very much echoed on a more anecdotal basis within the research that we carried out, and amongst some of the organisations that responded in our survey. Some of the other issues being experienced is that community organisations feel that they're having to do more for less. They're often, as the pressure increases, are having to go above and beyond the call of duty. And that includes volunteers who are really doing so much to support people who are in dire and desperate need. This is putting a lot of pressure on staff and volunteers, and there is a sense of volunteer fatigue within the sector. And some organisations have reported a difficulty in recruiting and retaining volunteers. They're also seeing an increasing number of situations involving people with more complex needs. And, that is inevitably a knock-on effect of public funding cuts and statutory services reducing, and an increase in safeguarding incidents which have been reported, which is an anecdotal aspect of the report, but it has been widely reported by the teaching profession as well, and it's something that RTVs have talked about. One of the participants that we spoke to, a fantastic organisation in Rutherglen and South, Lee Gardens Pool, told us that they are the last port of call when the local authority, citizens' advice or wellbeing officers can't get support to people because it's late on a Friday. That's when they contact us. If someone is going to be without food over the weekend, we're able to step in. And it's that aspect of the community sector which we saw time and time again, that, as I said, that going above and beyond the call of duty, catching people when they fall, being able to quickly and efficiently meet emergency needs, often where other organisations haven't been able to. They cut the red tape, they get on with it and they do it. And that is the common thread that we've seen throughout the report. One interesting aspect, but more worrying aspect of the cost of living crisis has been its impact on organisations which feel that they're drifting away from their core mission, which is often the objective to create systemic long-term change for their communities, whereas the current emphasis on cost of living has really taken them away from that in many instances, so that they feel that they're more of a sticking plaster solution. And this was quite articulately explained by Sam Froud-Powell at ACE, the community regeneration organisation for Kyra and Ely. It's somehow pulled us away from our mission of being that catalyst and convening lots of organisations to promote community development. We've got a really long-term vision of how we want our community to progress, and the cost of living crisis has had the effect of focusing a lot of work and energy on providing quite a short-term kind of support. And that is something that we heard from a lot of organisations who are struggling because maybe they're not fully focused on meeting the heating and eating needs of individuals and communities, but are still really trying to focus on that long-term systemic change. One of the things that really came across as well was the sheer resilience, creativity, innovation, and adaptability of community organisations and people to be able to deal with the cost of living crisis, to meet those demands in a sort of different way, in a creative way. And Mark Seymour, who is the manager of the GAP Wales in Newport, an asylum seeker and refugee organisation, said that I think the pandemic has awoken many of our umbrella organisations to the fact that actually our local communities have a lot of strengths and have innovative and creative people within them who can bring solutions to our communities. And I think that really came across in the research, how our community organisations are becoming the liquid around everything else, that they are filling the gaps where support has been removed for whatever reason, where infrastructure has been removed, and the flexibility in which they do that, and the energy that they bring, and the volunteer power that they bring, I think is becoming more and more recognised, but not always resourced and funded. So the impact on community organisations, well, probably one of the obvious ones is that it has become increasingly difficult to access funding, which I've already touched on. 84% said that the cost of living crisis had markedly affected them, and 45% said strongly. 50% highlighted that demand on services had increased, and 22% said their income had reduced. And that was often because people within the community that may have once paid to attend activities no longer have that financial ability to pay for activities. There's been a definite increase in demand for practical advice and advocacy, and that isn't just with specialist advice agencies, that's across the board. So that volunteers, for example, in many situations are having to deal with more complex cases and having to become advocates and help people with a range of different financial, housing, whatever issues that they're facing. And 54% of the organisations we surveyed had set up new services in response to the cost of living crisis. And there's been a noticeable increase in working adults accessing cost of living crisis services, reported by 69% of respondents. And generally, there's been an increased issue with people presenting with mental health issues, and increased loneliness and isolation amongst older people. And again, we think that part of that is linked to the repercussions of COVID-19. There's been, like everyone has experienced, increased core costs. And this is a particular issue for community organisations, which are often based in quite old, drafty, quite large buildings often. And that is very, very challenging for organisations, especially when not all funders are able or willing to recognise those increased hikes in utility bills. And these comments from some of our contributors really echo that extra demand that is being put onto our community organisations. The two in Community Hub in Merthyr Tydfil, which is doing some fantastic work, the manager there said that we are not experts. For people seeking support, their problems are getting more complex and specialist. As volunteers, we are helping people as there is no one else. And this is a message that's coming through time and time again in lots of different ways from organisations. So I'm going to pass on to Graham now, who's going to take you through some of the survey results.
Okay, thank you, Rosie. I would just like to start by giving my thanks as well to everybody who responded. The 140, over 140 responses. And very often with surveys, when you ask for comments, you just get very few comments. But I think it showed the passion that people have for this aspect, this issue, that we got a lot of comments as well. So what I'm presenting is very much a summary overview. There's a lot of information and comments underneath this, which Rosie has presented some of those statements. So we've got a lot of rich information from this. Just starting off then with filling up in a bit on what Rosie was saying about, the community organisations filling that gap, which has been left by restriction on funding of the public funding through central government, local governments, health boards, etc., and how community organisations have filled that gap. So we've got 51% agreeing that they feel they are replacing the statutory public sector, and that actually, in terms of how that has changed over time, 54% felt that this had increased during the COVID, from COVID through to the cost of living crisis. Next slide, please, Rosie. Now, I've included quite a few comments just to highlight really the richness of information we got below this, and just to highlight a few issues. I won't read all these out because of time, but they're on the slides and in the report, so you can go back to this. But just to pick out a few key themes here, really. Services are feeding people who simply can't earn enough or get enough benefits. We are finding that people are falling through the net and not getting the support. We want to reduce loneliness. Transport comes through a lot. Welfare benefit advice is comments on that, a few of those. Next slide, please, Rosie. And the transport again comes up there. Common theme is that people just can't get to either just general community services or sometimes crucial health appointments because the reduction in public transport and other services. And that theme which Rosie picked up earlier on about people just not being accessible. Lots more people are working from home, and just the number of staff have reduced in central services, so people just can't find a person. And not everybody can get on the end of a mobile phone and use an app. Some people just need to see someone. So we have to think about how digitally able people are as well. Next slide, please, Rosie. In terms of the groups, which are organisations who responded, felt had been disproportionately affected by the cost of living crisis. You can see that working families, working individuals, working single parents featured strongly there. 69% of respondents reported that one of these was a group which had been disproportionately affected. So it's clearly not just people who aren't working or on benefits, etc. Oh, hello.
Sorry.
So that is, we talk about the squeezed middle, but these are people who are working, they're earning, but they're just not earning enough because costs have risen so much. And obviously, importance of getting benefits for those people who can have it, who are entitled to it. But many of these people are just earning enough not to be entitled to benefits, but not to be able to afford the increased costs which we've seen recently. So working people is an important group which have suffered, but youth, young people and children are obviously significantly affected as well. 43% reported for young people and 30% of children. And this echoes with Bevan Foundation Winter Snapshot 2024 figures as well, where they found that families with children going out were a higher proportion who were going without essentials. And they highlighted also that it was a particular problem for disabled people. And as you can see, almost a third reported that disabled adults had been disproportionately affected, and families with a disabled family member. And also a very significant group there are carers. A small overall proportion of people, but 40% of, almost close to 40% of organisations reported that they'd seen them be disproportionately affected. So people who are perhaps not able to work because of their caring responsibilities are being particularly affected by the crisis. Next slide, please, Rosie.
I don't know why it's taking its time, Graham. Sorry.
Okay.
Don't know why. Oh,
There
we are.
Yes, moving from the effect on people in the community to actually the people in organisations, the effect on staff and volunteers. Rosie highlighted this earlier. I think quite a staggering figure for me was that the almost 2/3 of organisations reported that a large effect on their staff and volunteers was the financial worries that they were facing, reflecting perhaps the fact that many organisations are staffed by people who are volunteers, who perhaps aren't working full time, and we know that the third sector generally is lowly paid. So this is a group of people in these organisations who are going to experience the financial worries. So they themselves are experiencing the financial worries and having to try and support people while they're going through that, which must be very difficult. And that's perhaps reflected on the impact on mental health, which is a very high level, and increased work stress. We've seen earlier that most organisations reported an increase in demand, and that's reflected by work stress, I'm sure, and there's other aspects there about reduced quality of life, etc. Next slide, please, Rosie. In terms of the new services, over half of organisations reported that they provided new services. It's not surprising that a lot of these services would relate to the essentials of food and staying warm, a warm space, or warmth and energy efficiency, which would include things like insulation, hot water bottle distribution, light bulb distribution, etc. But there are other key aspects of there which perhaps a bit small on these slides, but the community shops, 7 new community shops were reported, and I highlight that it's not a huge number of shops, but it's a large undertaking to set up shops. I think that is very significant. And Rosie highlighted before that the extra need for support, advice and guidance, so 11 reported that. But even those who didn't report that, some of them were saying they were doing it in an ad hoc way. Some of the foods pantries and cafes were giving advice to people who are coming along about accessing benefits, etc. So there's a lot of informal advice going on as well beneath these figures. And reuse and repair is obviously a key aspect. And a final area of service there I want to highlight is the growth, no pun intended, of orchard and growing schemes, very often linked to the provision of food in pantries or food banks. Okay, if we move on, Rosie. And just to highlight one aspect, one scheme here, which Matt Taylor is going to talk about this later, so I won't steal his thunder. But the Victory grocery store in Torvine is just one example of a change of approach in these new services, where people just aren't given food. There's more of a move towards an independence and perhaps a removal of stigmatism, that you're not just being given a bunch of food and charity. You have an element of independence. You can go around in a supermarket type way and choose the products that you want and pay sometimes for those, perhaps a modest amount, but actually gives the people a sense of ownership that they are paying for what they want. In terms of these new services, obviously, key point is, are they sustainable? Are they needed for the long term? And the general view was that these are needed. People were given a choice of 7 comments as to what they felt were the future prospects of new services. And the vast majority felt that this was here to stay, the crisis was here to stay. And you can see almost a third said that this is needed for the long term, but dependent on funding. We know funding is obviously crucial for sustainability. And surprising, well, not surprisingly, perhaps very, very few people said that this was only needed for the short term. So people are digging in for the long term. This isn't something they think is going to be over quickly, but the funding needs to be there. Thank you, Rosie. But I want to highlight some positives as well in terms of, you know, we asked people what new opportunities arose during the cost of living crisis, and this is what people responded with. So new funding sources was highlighted by a third of respondees. Not surprisingly, perhaps, because there were grants attached to the cost of living crisis from a various number of organisations. But obviously some of those are coming to an end or have come to an end already. So whether that will be as positive in the future, we have to see. But new partnerships, people responded, about a fifth of respondees said there had been new partnerships set up. So that's a positive in many ways. Perhaps some of those were set up initially for during the COVID period, and we have to sort of consider whether those will continue in the long term. So I think that's something for us to keep an eye on. But at the point of the survey, they felt that was a positive. And similarly, a similar number reported that there were new delivery models along the lines of hubs, etc., etc. And about 1 in 7 said that there'd been additional new advice providers on benefits, etc., accessing benefits. And a small proportion actually said they had a rise in new volunteers.
Bit of a delay, Graham. I'm sorry. I don't know why it's doing
That's
this.
okay. We also asked organisations to pick their 3 priorities from a number of factors which would make the most difference to their tackling the cost of living challenges. And I won't go through all these because of time, but these are the options they had. So they could pick 3 of these. So it's interesting. I think the most interesting point from this graph is I've got to shut the window actually, so you can hear that mower.
No, it's okay, Graham. We can't hear anything.
Okay. It's hard to tell what people can hear from the outside. So the key point here, I think, is not surprisingly, half of organisations said that increased funding would make a big difference to their organisation. You'd expect that, but perhaps what is a key point here is that more people chose longer term funding. So the stability for funding was more important to them than increased funding. Obviously, increased funding is important, but the disparity between the two is quite striking, really. 25% more virtually responding on longer term funding. Sorry, it's on my screen. And utility subsidies also figured strongly there, as Rosie mentioned earlier. People are struggling with just the rising cost of utilities. There may be a little hope now, and there has been some reduction, but obviously they're still very high compared to what they used to be.
Don't you love technology?
It has slowed down, isn't it? As we
It
go
has.
along.
Maybe it's pressure on the system. I don't know. It's not going
But
forward.
there's only a few more slides, so hopefully
Yeah,
not too much more
I
delay.
could potentially stop sharing and reshare. Try doing that. What do you think? Yeah, I'm going to just try and do that. Apologies, everyone. See if this works. No. I'll try it on a different one. Which slide were we on? Was it this one?
Last one, yeah.
Yeah, okay, so this is the next one.
Can you do slideshow or you?
I will try.
It's gone back. That's it. That seems to be quicker. Okay. And just the final one from me on the data. Similarly, we asked organisations what would make the difference to community members, what would make the most difference, what factors. And you see there's a more even split on this really. And they chose sustainable funding. So that sustainability really comes through again. Greater help to access government support. We mentioned several times that people are struggling just to get the benefits, etc., which they're entitled to. We've highlighted public transport as a key issue, and organisations felt that was a key issue to their members, and ensuring free and low cost activities local also featured strongly, being responded by around a third of organisations, along with simple practical support. And then there's other aspects there which I'll leave you to look through given time. So that's a quick summary, a quick run through of the main data from the survey. Obviously, this covers it in more detail in the report, and I appreciate some of this is a bit of a run through, but hopefully you can have time to look through these slides in more detail or look through the report. I'll pass you back to Rosie.
Okay, so just rounding off really, some of the more qualitative stuff that came out from some of the suggestions from people about what could help community organisations. The longer term funding aspect was highlighted significantly, as you've already seen, and the manager of Hope Pantry, who's going to be talking today as well, actually, Heidi, said that you spend all your time and energy finding and applying for funding, spending funding, reporting on the funding, rinse and repeat, so that it's a never-ending treadmill. Whereas if you know you're going to have funding for 3 or 5 years, you could get on with doing other things. And this came across time and time again, people under quite a lot of pressure and stress, trying to find the next piece of funding to keep their staff member in post that's running their their community facility. And it's a very stressful process, and also a lot of the funding comes through at the last minute. It's short term. People want you to spend the money quickly on something that may not actually be necessarily hugely relevant to that organisation, which is a shame, because sometimes people don't even bother applying for these pots of money because it's just too difficult, and they don't feel that it's worth their while sometimes. Whereas that money, it could potentially be structured in a different way. Good governance is really has been uncovered as really the backbone to the sustainability of community organisations, in terms of aside from funding issues, but having a good finance person on board, whether that's as a volunteer in the position of a volunteer chair or a finance officer, that kind of collective responsibility for resourcing, scrutinizing resources, managing the funding and the public purse, the money that is coming into the organization. We had lots of examples where organisations were doing okay, really, considering, because they had reasonable reserves due to, you know, a period of time where they'd had that kind of strong financial management. And that kind of hand-holding of organisations and helping them to develop good governance was something that was highlighted as something that could really help the sector. Having the living wage in place for staff was seen as a really key way of funders being able to use their power to increase the income of people working within charities so that they could afford to live more comfortably, and that's something that funders could potentially support. More of them are now, but we heard from so many organisations where staff were really struggling to meet their basic needs on their salary, and many examples of people moving into other sectors where they could have a more secure term of employment with better terms and conditions, basically, and higher salaries. Having local funding pots was seen as really important, because some of those really small kind of micro projects, such as one that we use as a case study within the report, it's Letterston Cafe in Pembrokeshire. It's an entirely volunteer-run community cafe within the small village of Letterston, which is having huge impact on the members of its community in terms of tackling the cost of living crisis. And it doesn't take a lot of money to run a project like that. And those people don't necessarily have the capacity to apply for large, more strategic funds. So that's where the sort of small pots of money administered by all CVCs and those kind of organisations can be really powerful. And then benefit reform is another thing that comes out through the report and echoes the findings of the Bevan Foundation, that so many households are now missing out on funding of they predict about £4,000 a year from initiatives such as the council tax reduction scheme. But because of a lack of awareness, the complex application processes, eligibility criteria, and things like language barriers, so many people aren't accessing these things, or they need a huge amount of help to access these schemes, which is the message that's coming through from community groups. And as Graham mentioned, so many of those organisations are doing this work, but they're not getting paid for it. They're not getting recognition for that work that they're doing. The impact and value of all that work that's being done is not necessarily seen, but it is huge. And so that was something else that came out of the report. So on that note, that's our presentation finished, but we are going to be answering questions. I'm not sure if we're doing that now, Chris, or are we moving on to Eleri now?
Yes, we are. So
Yeah.
thank you very much, Rosie and Graham. That was really helpful and very, very informative. So we're going to quickly pick up on the recommendations and report, and then we'll go on to the first round of Q&A.
So you should all be able to see my screen. I'm Eleri Williams, Policy Officer at Building Communities Trust. And as Chris has mentioned, I'm going to present to you the recommendations from this report. These recommendations have been identified through the lived experiences of people working or volunteering in community groups and organisations throughout Wales. We believe they're tangible actions which, if met, could improve working conditions and the environment that community groups and organisations are operating in, enabling them to continue their vital work supporting thousands of people across Wales. So we have 5 recommendations, and you will be pleased to know this is the last bit of PowerPoint in today's session. So without further ado, first recommendation is around long-term funding, which is obviously a big issue that was highlighted in the findings. We're calling on the Welsh Government to develop a flexible and long-term funding model to support community action using the Dormant Assets Scheme. We're also calling for recommendations around core costs. We suggest that funders and commissioners should recognise the extreme pressures and additional demands community groups are experiencing and build a contribution to core costs into funding awards. Similarly, we're calling for funders and commissioners to ensure grant recipients and suppliers pay their staff the real living wage. Again, this was something that came up throughout the research. The next one is around benefits. We do recognise, obviously, that social security, social welfare is a reserved matter. And there didn't appear to be an overwhelming amount of confidence that there would be reform in the form of a permanent uplift to universal credit, or more topically, reforms to the 2-child limit. However, there are some really clear levers that Welsh Government has available to it. We know that they're working currently on a Welsh benefit system, but we don't think that's going far enough. We think that this work should be prioritised, and in doing so, it must recognise and invest in face-to-face provision of advice and assistance, ensuring that people can access the support that they are entitled to. And then our last recommendation is around support for energy costs. We suggest that Welsh Government funders and infrastructure bodies should support community organisations to meet their rising energy costs through a more expansive range of grant schemes, including contributions to retrofit measures. We recognise, obviously, this is happening in part, but we think it could be more holistic and more expansive. So that is our rundown of our recommendations for change. And I think we're now going into a Q&A slot. So I'm going to hand over to Chris, and I know some of you have been putting questions in the Q&A, so please carry on doing so.
Thank you very much, Hilary. So we've got a mixture of questions and comments. I'm going to focus on the questions, and I've answered a couple of the points already in the chat. And certainly for those of you who work with us on community projects, some of these are things we can take forward on a practical basis. The first substantial question, which I was going to cover, is the one from Gemma about whether things are getting worse or are worse here in Wales. I think the evidence is both, actually, that in Wales, we started from a worse base of higher levels of child poverty in particular, and lower incomes. But this is definitely a trend that is very noticeable across the UK. And interestingly, just reflecting on the points in the report, the recent assessment by Joseph Rowntree Foundation is that the cost of living crisis is not going to be solved anytime soon. So as the people answering the survey reflected, the crisis that they're addressing is likely to be for quite a while. The next question was about local authority cuts, and I just wondered whether Graham and Rosie have got reflections on that from what the research told them.
Shall I take that one, Rosie, to start off with?
Yeah, okay. Thanks.
Obviously, all public sector organisations have been cut. We know that. It's not the UK government cutting local authorities in Wales, the funding of local authorities in Wales, because obviously Wales decides how much money goes to local authorities. But overall, Wales has had less money. All nations have had less money, and so they have to respond by cutting something. And obviously, local authority funding has been one of many areas cut. But I'm just reading the question. How much the extent is directly? It's going to be a large extent. Yes, I mean many of the comments below the headline information we've been presenting talk about that they used to get money from local authorities and they don't get that anymore, or it's been reduced markedly. And some of the saying it's been reduced markedly, and next year they're not expecting to get any. So a lot of respondees did say that they've had a reduction and they expect to lose their money from local authorities. So that's something they have to then adapt to. So yes, it is a major problem.
I think there was some evidence as well about particular areas that had of support, such as day centres closing, and also youth services and youth clubs, so that people are having to find, community organisations are filling gaps there in terms of making other alternative sort of provisions. And yeah, so that came up quite a lot, particularly for older people, disabled people who are more vulnerable. there's just a real deficit of public sector services for them to access. So that was something that came through. So I think, it's almost, you could do a study on this, just this aspect, and unfortunately we didn't have a very clear sort of breakdown of all the different areas. I think we need to sort of go back and drill down a bit further into that. So this study was much more about sort of painting a picture, but yeah, certainly we had quite a few examples around that.
Thank you. Graham, Rose, I think the next one is probably for you as well. It's about the type of support, quite an important question, I think, about the shifting sands of responsibility and focus of work of community groups. What type of support community organisations felt they were providing that should have been the responsibility of different public bodies?
We have that breakdown in comments. I don't have analysis of that to hand, but there is information there we could look at more. Rosie has highlighted some of those areas. Youth facilities came up strongly. Advice and support on things like benefits came up as well. And in terms of health boards, yes, state and local authorities in terms of daycare facilities, etc. So they were key areas which did come up. I don't have the statistics on how many of those came up, but they were common strands which came up.
Yeah, and I think transport, is another thing.
Yes,
and disability services, and those sorts of, as we mentioned, day centres, and then the sort of closures of many of the day centres. So we could probably drill down a bit further with that, Graham, to get some further information.
Yeah.
If that's okay, Rebecca.
Right. I'm going to take. We are running on against time. Some of these questions we'll try and answer in writing, particularly the more detailed questions. I'd like to take Gemma's question about transport, though, and if they've been asked if you can expand a bit about the issues on transport, because this is definitely a growing factor that many community organisations are highlighting. If you can see the question, Graham or Rosie.
Yeah, Rosie, or shall I start and you want to add chip in again?
Sorry, which? Yeah, do you want to start? Yeah.
Yeah. We highlighted a few of the comments in our presentation that we had received, but a lot of the comments we had were about just reductions in public services. So local bus services just reducing, so people just can't move around. And in some cases, local communities have set up alternative community transport, like Nerydd Ogwen being one, which we mentioned earlier. So that has major implications in terms of just getting to hospital appointments I mentioned earlier on, or just getting to community centres, etc. And it was highlighted by a couple. There's a particular problem for young people who generally don't have that much money if they're not working particularly, and just getting to the local community centre for youth facilities has been problematic. And one organisation we know particularly has set up their own transport to actually go around and fetch young people and bring them to the youth centre in the evenings. So it's a combination of just people not having the money to afford transport, and also actually the local services just being reduced.
There was another comment as well that we had about how it affects people's ability to go to work, because especially for people in rural areas, they're just, the bus routes just aren't there, and they only run at certain times. So it means that it's a huge barrier for people to actually access work in many cases, which was something that came through the research as well.
Thank you. We've got a range of other questions we haven't got to yet. We'll have a second Q&A session in a few minutes. Some of the questions, though, we're going to try. We'll probably need to pick up after the event, because there's a couple of them are really quite detailed, which we'll need to unpick stuff from the research, and we've obviously got everybody's names and contact details, so we'll come back to questions. And there's also some really interesting comments in there, but we are on wider policy issues we can't necessarily answer. But I would like to come to the second round of presentations now, which are really the stories, if you like, from the front line, from organisations who are dealing with the challenges that have been described in the research. And I'm going to ask Heidi Jacobson first from the Hope Pantry in Merthyr to talk about their work.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Heidi. I manage the Hope Pantry based in Merthyr Tydfil. Hope Pantry is a sustainable food pantry, and we've been open for 3 years this week. We started our pantry as a response to COVID, when we were helping people in the community during COVID with their food shopping, and we quickly discovered that there was a lot of hidden food insecurity in our borough that nobody knew about, and COVID has uncovered that for us. So the way Hope Pantry works is that what we're not is a food bank. So we're designed for people whose budgets need to stretch further, and we do some help with their food shopping with the aim of preventing people from being swept into debt. And we believe we do that in a way that is dignified, offering choice to people and offering hope. So our members pay £4.50 a week. They come, they shop in our pantry. They come in, they have a cup of tea or coffee, they sit, they have community, and then they pick up a basket and they come and shop. We have a range of fresh food, frozen food, store cupboard staples, pet food, which is super important, some cleaning products, toiletries, and all our fresh fruit and veg is also free. Because if you've got a choice of picking up items to fill your kids' tummies or trying a butternut squash, the butternut squash gets left behind. So this way it means that people can try items that they may not have tried before, and we're offering some variety. We're part of the All Local Pantry Network, which is a network of pantries throughout the country, which helps us because it gives us a community to be involved with. And also in Merthyr, we have a food poverty network. So there are a number of pantries in Merthyr with the aim of eradicating food insecurity in our area. For the £4.50, our members have about £20 to £25 worth of items. So it means that their budgets are stretching further and that they can spend their money on other things, which we find has been gas and electric, school shoes, the everyday things. Our current membership is 266, and we see about 160 people through our doors in our 3 sessions. Our household reach is 402 adults and 202 children. We have seen a massive impact into the cost of living. Mainly, our demographic has changed. Our demographic is mainly these days people who are what is deemed the squeeze middle. So people who work, who budget really well, who find that there is just too much month left at the end of the money. When all your bills go up and your wages stay the same, it's people who are homeowners and private renters. Mortgages have gone up, wages have stayed the same, and there is just nothing left. So what do we do about it? Well, we know that we can't meet everybody's needs, but we can help those that come through our doors. We ask members to come fortnightly. If they can do fortnightly, it means we can squeeze other people in. Another issue for us is our food. So we're self-sustaining with our £4.50s a week for the basic aspects of pantry, but our costs have risen too. Our amount of food we get from FareShare Cymru has decreased by almost half. So we are quite inventive with where we can resource food from. And we also use local providers as well, because we want to keep members' money in our local community. So we use a local greengrocer, a local butcher, a small local supermarket. So we are then invested back into our community because we feel that that is very, very important. Pantry is so much more than food though. The food is the main thing that we start with, but we do a lot of support for people because they have nowhere else to go. So we'll support people with benefits, we'll signpost people on, we help people as part of the community. And we're very blessed to have an amazing CVC in our area who are very, very supportive. What we can't do without is our volunteers. We've got a group of 35 volunteers who give over 60 hours volunteering a week. And without them, we couldn't run. So I'm a full-time member of staff. I'm very fortunate. I'm employed. I'm funded by the National Lottery, for whom we're also very grateful to. But we rely on the wider community, and it's a team effort. We don't see this going away anytime soon. When we started 3 years ago, I think we thought it was probably going to be a one-year project for 30 to 50 people, and then life would go back to normal. I think it's fair to say that this is our new normal. We don't see it going away anytime soon. The demand on our service increases, and if we could open more days, we would. At the moment, we can't because of the food supply that we have. But yeah, we're grateful, we're blessed, we do our bit, and it's a community response. Thank you.
Thank you very much, thank you very much, Heidi. What I'd like to do is ask Matt to come in now, and then we'll have a chance for some more questions. And be particularly, obviously, there are a lot of unanswered questions which we'll try and get to, but also very keen if anybody's got questions for Heidi and Matt, that'll be a chance to ask them in a couple of minutes. So over to you, Matt, when you're ready.
Yeah, hi, my name is Matt and I run the Victory grocery store here in Cwmbran, and very similar to Heidi really, we run a food pantry. We set this up off the back of COVID and the cost of living crisis. We used to run a small little food bank on a Friday that was very small. We were just reliant on what we were given, and then we decided to open a grocery store that was open. We opened 6 days a week, offering 15 items for £5. And what we really wanted to do was that £5 helps to restore dignity back to people, so people didn't feel that they were stigmatized in needing food. Because one of the big things that we discovered when we set up the grocery store was that a lot of people who need help feel that they shouldn't need it, or they feel that they shouldn't need access to it. But actually, we discovered that a lot of working families or people that earn just a little bit too much, and as much as, like Heidi says, that we discovered that people use this for lots of different reasons. So some of them are, there's too much month. When there's a 5-week month. They don't get paid to the end, so they have to tie themselves over. But when we opened, we grew up to 1,400 families within about 6 months, and it was getting to the point where it's like, wow, we were really struggling to keep it on the shelves. But it has calmed down a little bit now, which is great. It's more sustainable now, and we're seeing about 250 people a week. And like I said, they vary from students. So some students come and see us. They see us every so often, go back to uni, spend their budget. And then we got working families that may earn just a little bit too much, so they don't get any help. The elderly that are on their pensions, struggling to just feed themselves and feed their families. And we just sort of we really believe in it being a hand up, not a handout. We really want them to be able to shop their own shopping and to be able to choose their own items. So with that £5 that we get, and that's partly my job, is that I then match what we get from other food organisations. So like FareShare, we sort of try and buy things in that will help make meals. So it's not just it's about educating people to think about what's already in their store cupboards, what they need to buy, and then sort of put meals together for the family. So we try to get things in like fresh fruit and vegetables. Just because someone's struggling to eat shouldn't mean that they should get yesterday's bananas, because we wouldn't do that. So we wouldn't want to eat gone off bread or gone off fruit and vegetables. So this enables us to buy food in, but also not be so reliant on already overstretched resources food-wise. It means it is a fine balancing act, and we do have to sort of really budget and really sort of see our way through. But we're just seeing people coming through our doors who, because they can choose their own, they open up to us more as well. So they just want to chat to us more about, it's about a community. It's about making sure that we're not handing someone a bag and saying, we know you need help, but do what you want with this. It's no, come and choose your own. And then they want to talk to us about the things that they're going through. And we're seeing just a massive increase in people that that are struggling really through no fault of their own. You know, some of these people, like you say, you know, they're working, they're keeping 2 jobs, you know, they're paying their way, but they just can't get to the end of the month without, you know, without needing that little bit of support and that little bit of help. And you know, but the beauty of the grocery store is as well, is because it's £5, we want people to be educated enough to learn to get themselves back on their feet. So it's about getting them back up. You know, they may need this for a little bit, and then once they're back on their feet, they're back up in society and contributing once again. So it's really about sort of encouraging people to not stay in this situation and helping them to get out of it, because that's what we want to do. We want to see people back up, back on their feet, and back in community and back in society doing what they do best, you know. And it's just been a massive undertaking, and we're out across the 2-year threshold. So we've been here about 2 years now, and like Heidi says, I agree, it's not going to go anywhere. This need is just increasing, and we're just seeing just sort of so many people needing help, you know. And it's just and in particularly signposting people to the right places. So things like benefits, housing, citizens advice, you know, wherever we can pinpoint people to, because we don't have all the answers, but we're finding that people are coming in with more than just a food need. It's other things as well that is contributing to it, but it's getting access. You know, I loved the bit in the report that said about Friday afternoon. You know, if things close down on Fridays at 5 o'clock, well, if you've got no food for the weekend, where are you going to go? What are you going to do? You know, they have no choices, you know. So yeah, so that's why we're here, and it does make an impact. So yeah, and that's us.
Thank you very much, Matt. Yes, and that last point resonates with quite a lot of the organisations. We work with the Building Communities Trust as well. I think Ian Morris is on the call, and that will relate to the work of Kyra Development Trust very clearly. Very happy. We haven't got any specific questions for Matt or Heidi, but if you have any, please put them in the chat, and we'll get a chance to answer them. There are a number of unanswered questions though, which we have already, which we'll try and get through now. The first one we haven't answered is the one from Gwendolyn Stirk about the message to funders. It's a really interesting one about trust. And I think in general we have seen some movement towards that, particularly during COVID, especially from independent funders rather than the public sector. But little bits of progress since then as well, even from 1 or 2 local authorities who have given longer term funding to community groups, but it's not particularly widespread at the moment. And I think for the nature of this work, the issues that Gwendolyn's raising are really important. That I think as the respondees recognise, we need flexible funding for it to be able to be effective. And also a very valid point, I think, from Alison at Bavo about the nature of reserves running down. There's only a finite period for which you can use reserves, however much they've been helpful for in the short term, as identified by the research. Are there any other observations any of the panelists would like to make on the questions? So a lot of them are comments rather than questions. Ones that I would certainly recognise as being very well grounded. But I don't know if any of you have got further points you'd like to make responding to those.
I could just come in on the sort of funding aspect of things. That yes, there was real variance in responses from organisations, some of who had done quite well to, let's say, feather their nests during difficult times. And actually COVID-19 had the effect of distorting income for quite a lot of organisations, because there was quite a sort of a range of grants available, and lots of, you know, organisations did quite well during that time and were able to stockpile a bit of money in their reserves, you know, that have actually, it's been very fortunate that it's helped to contribute to some of the sustainability. And the ones that are really able to be more stable are the ones that have maybe diversified and looked at different ways of being able to draw an income. But that's often dependent on having a team of expertise within, you know, the organization and the capacity to be able to do things like bid for contracts, for example, which an organization like ACE in Cardiff, which we interviewed, have very effectively done. And there's a strength when organizations collaborate generally, and there are some examples of where public sector and organizations have come together to tackle issues, and that began in COVID-19, where partnerships developed, and in some areas that has continued to work quite well and has remained in place, and this the fact that lots of public sector bodies are recognizing more the value of the third sector, because the third sector has the power to answer some of society's biggest problems in a creative way, and capitalizing on volunteer power, which is absolutely huge. And we have a way in the community sector of connecting with people that the statutory sector just isn't able to have in the same way. And that's to do with trust, it's to do with approachability, people feeling comfortable within community organizations. They often know the volunteers, and they're part of a community. So it's a unique situation, and one that does need to be more recognized. And I'm probably rambling a bit, but it is something I feel really passionate about, and that it goes back to that one of the questions was around funders trusting communities to find those solutions, to work out what is needed. And I think that if they could spend more time doing that and less time at the grindstone, writing pages and pages of applications where they may have a drop in the ocean chance of getting the funding, you know, if we could find some sort of solution there to allow organizations to be creative and valued on their past success and their track record and their reputation, then I think that would really help organizations going forward.
Thank you. There's a couple more comments in the chat, but no additional questions. Any further reflection from panelists? And a message actually for Matt and Heidi from one of the funders on the call, which is really helpful. So make sure we'll make sure you get a copy of that as well, even if you don't pick it up right now. Right, I'm going to move to wrap up the session just a couple of minutes early. First of all, thank you to all our panelists today who've given really valuable insights, and also to those of you who participated in the session. I hope you found it useful. A lot of you have made really valuable contributions in the chat and discussion as well. What I would say is that what we've got here is the first collection in Wales of a detailed study into the impact of the cost of living crisis on community organisations. The one area I would disagree with our researchers at the very beginning is the sample. I don't think the sample is that small. Actually, I think the sample of 130 organisations is reasonably substantial across the sector, and therefore the picture it paints is robust. One thing that we hope this will do is a report is to highlight the challenges that are coming up, and I think there are some dangers in this research which are lurking under the surface, which I'll come on to in a moment. One obvious point, though, as many of you have referenced, and something we see a lot in our work, is that most community groups are set up to provide originally opportunities or support for people in their communities of different types. And what the cost of living crisis has done is forced many of them to change their focus. We've heard from 2 food pantries today, but many organisations that are doing this work were originally set up to do a range of other different things, but the crisis that has come home in so many communities has forced the cost of living crisis to the absolute fore of what they do. And as we've heard, it's likely to get worse, and there are 2 main drivers for it getting worse. One is that the financial situation in which many individuals find themselves is going to continue to deteriorate. Ultimately, as many of you have commented, a reformed social security system has got to be at the heart of the solution, but there's no sign of that coming at the moment. We as BCT have signed up to the Essentials Guarantee campaign from the Trussell Trust and Joseph Rowntree Foundation, and it's by addressing issues around that we're really going to be able to help individuals in the longer term. But the other thing that I think we're hearing today is the financial situation of many of the organisations affected by this remains fragile, and there is a sense that the other thing that worries me is that organisations that are coping today will really struggle in the longer term, and there is a dependence on their work which is recognised rhetorically by public bodies but not in terms of actions. And this as people in communities are going to struggle, and organisations working with them are going to struggle. And we need to this report gives us an opportunity to recognise that and make that point really clear to decision makers. We will, as I said, be sending on all the presentations from this, and we'll get back to you with questions if you've asked specific ones as soon as we can. And thank you again for your attendance and participation today, and I hope you found it a very valuable event.